passed the test.
Don't ever invite a vampire into your house, you silly boy.
Did you know that?
Of course. Everyone knows that.
Here, what's the matter with all of you?
Imagine this, a neon boardwalk buzzing with music, teenagers swarming arcade machines, the air thick with sea salt and rebellion. Underneath that glowing surface, shadows wait, hungry and patient. In 1987, a film captured that dangerous magic and turned it into a legend. That film was The Lost Boys. It wasn't just another vampire flick. It was a warning disguised as a thrill ride. A fairy tale rewritten in blood and leather. The boardwalk that should have felt like a carnival suddenly felt like a trap. The promise of eternal youth was no longer a dream. It was a curse dressed in black trench coats and spiked hair. Behind the scenes, the movie was just as turbulent. The script wasn't even meant to be frightening. It started out as a kid's adventure. Makeup effects looked stunning on screen, but tormented the actors wearing them. The soundtrack outsold the film itself and became a cult icon. And the people who walked out of that fog, the actors, the director, even the extras, would carry the weight of this movie for the rest of their lives. Here are 20 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up.
Number 1.
Before the leather jackets, before the motorcycles, before Kiefer Sutherland turned into a vampire icon, The Lost Boys wasn't even scary. The original script was a children's adventure, more in line with The Goonies than a gothic horror film. Picture this, a group of kids around 11 or 12 years old, flashing their flashlights into dark caves, setting up treehouse forts, and facing off against cartoonish, wrinkled old vampires who looked more like Nosferatu than nightclub predators. There was no blood, no motorcycles roaring across the boardwalk, and certainly no sense of seduction or danger. The director originally attached to the project was Richard Donner, the same man who made The Goonies. But when Donner left to focus on Lethal Weapon, the project stalled. Enter Joel Schumacher, the man who would completely transform it. Schumacher wasn't interested in a kiddie adventure. He flipped open the script, turned a few pages, and gave the studio one condition. I'll do it, but it has to be sexy, scary, and adult. And just like that, the innocence vanished. The kids aged up into rebellious teenagers. The childish humor was stripped away. In its place came danger, desire, and identity crisis. The movie wasn't about good versus evil anymore. It was about temptation, hunger, and the seductive pull of darkness. That change detonated the entire tone of the film. The boardwalk was no longer a playground. It was a siren's call. And instead of giving us another lighthearted adventure, Schumacher handed us something darker, cooler, and ultimately genre-defining.
Number 2.
One of the coolest things about The Lost Boys is watching the vampires stalk their prey from the skies. You feel their presence as they swoop down from above. But here's the trick. You never actually see them fly. There are no wings, no clumsy wire rigs, no cheesy effects. Just a point-of-view camera gliding through the night, paired with the sound of rushing wind and sudden impact. This wasn't just a creative choice, it was survival. The production simply didn't have the budget for elaborate flying effects. No wires, no stunt doubles dangling in the sky. And without today's CGI, they had no way to convincingly show full-on vampire flight. So instead of showing it, they implied it. The camera became the monster. We, the audience, were dragged into the vampire's perspective, soaring just inches above the boardwalk before pouncing on terrified victims. That limitation transformed into a strength. By saving the money shots for the finale and letting imagination do the heavy lifting, the film created one of its most terrifying signatures. What you didn't see was far scarier than what you did. And in horror, that rule always holds true. The unknown is the most frightening thing of all.
Number 3.
If you asked the studio early in production, they never would have told you that Kiefer Sutherland was going to be the icon of The Lost Boys. He didn't have the most lines. His role wasn't the lead. On paper, his character David wasn't even the focus. But sometimes, a single look changes everything. When Sutherland first stepped on set, platinum blonde spiked hair, long black trench coat, eyes cold enough to freeze the screen, the entire film shifted. He didn't play David like a monster. He played him like a rock star. He was calm, confident, magnetic, and terrifying in his silence. The director noticed immediately. So did the editors. Suddenly, David was getting more screen time, more close-ups, a stronger ending. By the time filming wrapped, David wasn't just another vampire. He was the movie's poster. Sutherland had done what few actors manage. He stole the entire film without ever raising his voice. One icy stare was all it took.
Number 4.
The role of Michael, the conflicted older brother caught between family loyalty and the lure of vampire immortality, nearly never happened. Jason Patric, who played Michael, didn't want the role at first. He thought the script was messy, too teen-focused, too drenched in fog machines and 80s hair gel. He wanted serious roles, not horror mixed with glam rock. But Joel Schumacher pushed back hard. He told Patrick that The Lost Boys wasn't about monsters. It was about transformation, identity, family, control, seduction. Eventually, Patrick gave in, but even while shooting, he wasn't convinced. He later admitted he didn't truly understand the film until he saw it with a packed audience. That was when he finally realized this wasn't just a teen horror movie. It was a cult phenomenon in the making. The project he nearly walked away from ended up being one of the first films he was ever proud to be part of.
Number 5.
When you watch The Lost Boys, you'll notice how authentic the boardwalk feels. The arcades, the flashing rides, the grimy, neon-soaked nightlife. That's because none of it was a set. They filmed on location at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk. But here's the thing, the extras weren't extras. They were locals, real drifters, runaways, people living rough on the edge of society. And when the cameras rolled, the chaos didn't stop. Crew members were warned to watch their wallets. Fights broke out between takes. Some of the background actors weren't pretending to look sketchy. They were sketchy. The line between movie fantasy and harsh reality blurred quickly. So while the vampires were fictional, the danger on that boardwalk was very real. And that authenticity bleeds through the screen, giving the film its raw, unnerving edge.
Number 6.
It looks like a simple scene. Corey Haim as Sam lounging in the bathtub, headphones on, singing to himself. A moment of comic relief before the tension explodes when Michael crashes in. On screen, it feels light, playful, even goofy. But behind the scenes, it was anything but. The house they were filming in had no heating. The water in that tub was ice cold, and production went long into the night. Take after take, Haim had to sit submerged, motionless, waiting for the cue. At first, it was just uncomfortable, but then something worse started happening. His body began shaking uncontrollably. His lips turned pale. Crew members realized what was happening. The young actor was showing early signs of hypothermia. They rushed in, pulled him from the tub, wrapped him in towels, and fired up space heaters just to bring his body temperature back up. What audiences saw as a light, almost silly scene was actually filmed under conditions so extreme it nearly sent Haim to the hospital. That's the thing about The Lost Boys. What looks easy, playful, or cool on screen was often hiding very real struggles just out of frame.
Number 7.
If you watch David in the film, the way he carries himself, the way he commands every scene, you'd never guess that Kiefer Sutherland was hiding something major. He had broken his arm in a motorcycle accident just before filming began. Instead of admitting it and risking being recast, Sutherland kept it a secret. He showed up to set with his arm in a cast, and the crew scrambled to work around it. Costuming switched to long sleeves. Camera angles became more deliberate. Fight choreography was adjusted to protect him. What makes this wild is that David, Sutherland's character, is supposed to be the picture of control, calm, calculated, and lethal. Yet the man playing him was one wrong move away from searing pain. The audience never noticed. The studio never knew. But when you rewatch the film, every time David gestures or fights, remember, that performance wasn't just acting cool. It was acting through pain and pulling it off so flawlessly, it turned him into an icon.
Number 8.
Sometimes Hollywood casting is about big names, resumes, and auditions. But for Billy Wirth, who played Dwayne, one of David's vampire crew, it came down to one thing: vibe. Wirth wasn't a full-time actor. In fact, he was spotted by Joel Schumacher not while performing on stage, but simply hanging out in a nightclub crowd. Schumacher saw his look, the intensity in his face, the aura of danger without saying a word, and immediately knew he belonged in the gang. Verth barely had lines. His backstory was minimal, but his presence was undeniable. That wild hair, that cold glare. It was exactly the visual Schumacher needed to round out David's crew. It's a reminder of how The Lost Boys wasn't just cast with actors. It was cast with archetypes, faces that could sell a myth in seconds. Dwayne didn't need dialogue. He just needed to exist in that foggy, neon-lit world, and audiences would remember him forever.
Number 9.
Most fans know The Lost Boys eventually spawned a couple of direct-to-video sequels, but what fewer people realize is that the universe truly expanded in a place most moviegoers never saw: comic books. In the 2000s, The Lost Boys was resurrected on the page. These weren't reboots or remakes. They were direct continuations. Michael returned, Sam returned, and yes, the Frog Brothers were still hunting vampires, but the comics went places the movies never dared. They were darker, stranger, more surreal. They dove deeper into the twisted mythology of Santa Carla, the so-called murder capital of the world. Even side characters got lore. Remember the legendary saxophone player, dripping in sweat, rocking chains under purple stage lights? In the comics, he got a backstory. He wasn't just an eccentric performer. He was the believer, part prophet, part musician, a living symbol of the chaos that pulsed through the town. The sequels may have kept the franchise alive, but it was the comics that truly cracked the coffin wide open, letting fans glimpse the strange, haunted mythology buried underneath the neon glow.
Number 10.
Even if you've only seen The Lost Boys once, there's a moment you'll never forget. The shirtless saxophone player, muscles glistening, chains swinging, hips thrusting, wailing into his instrument like he was summoning the apocalypse. That wasn't just some background extra. That was Tim Capello, a touring musician who played sax for Tina Turner. He was already famous in the music world, known for his wild performances and bodybuilder physique. But in The Lost Boys, with less than a minute of screen time, he became immortal. What makes it legendary is that nothing about that performance was staged. That was how Capello actually played live shows. Shirtless, drenched in sweat, belting out notes with raw physical energy. Schumacher didn't tell him to act larger than life. Capello simply was larger than life. Decades later, fans still show up at his concerts dressed like him, chain around the neck, purple lights in the background, ready to relive that single scene over and over. He wasn't a vampire, but in those few seconds, he stole the screen in a way that even fanged immortals couldn't.
Number 11.
When you think of The Lost Boys, two unlikely vampire hunters always come to mind: Edgar and Alan Frog, better known as the Frog Brothers. At first glance, they look like ordinary teenagers running a comic book store, but the second they open their mouths, you realize something's off. They don't talk like kids, they talk like hardened war veterans. Originally, these characters were written as awkward comic relief, bumbling, over-their-head teens trying to sound tough. But when Corey Feldman walked into rehearsal, everything changed. Feldman showed up with his voice dropped 2 octaves lower. He wore camouflage. He puffed out his chest like a miniature soldier. And when asked what he was doing, he explained he was channeling Rambo and Chuck Norris. Director Joel Schumacher didn't just approve. He pushed Feldman to go even further. Together with Jameson Newlander, who played Alan, the two studied action movies, practiced grim expressions, and perfected their gravelly voices. What began as clumsy comic relief transformed into something sharper, a full-blown parody of action heroes. They weren't good at their jobs. They weren't polished or skilled. But in a town crawling with real monsters, their over-the-top bravado became both hilarious and strangely effective. The result? The Frog Brothers became cult icons. The kids who thought they were in Rambo, but somehow ended up saving Santa Carla.
Number 12.
The boardwalk in The Lost Boys feels like a character in itself. Neon lights, rides spinning into the night, the sea crashing behind it. But here's the secret. The city it was filmed in, Santa Cruz, didn't actually want to be associated with the movie at all. Why? Because Santa Cruz had history. Dark history. Just a decade earlier, in the 1970s, Santa Cruz had been rocked by a series of gruesome serial killings. The press dubbed it the murder capital of the world. By the mid-80s, the city was still trying to scrub away that reputation, to replace it with images of beaches, sunshine, and family fun. Then, The Lost Boys came along with its fog, blood, and vampire murders. The studio wanted to use the city's real name. Santa Cruz officials gave them a hard no, so the filmmakers changed it. Santa Cruz became Santa Carla, a fictional town where danger lurked behind every arcade game. They even leaned into the city's dark past, building a fake "Welcome to Santa Carla, murder capital of the world" sign. Locals weren't thrilled, but the sign stayed in the movie. And for horror fans, Santa Carla became just as real as Santa Cruz ever was. A mythologized version of a seaside town where eternal youth always comes at a price.
Number 13.
After all the chaos, the motorcycle chases, the vampire battles, the explosions, The Lost Boys ends on a moment so quiet, so understated, that it almost feels out of place. The dust has settled, the vampires are dead, the family is standing in their wrecked home, stunned and silent. And then, without looking up, Grandpa walks to the fridge, pulls out a drink, and mutters, "One thing about living in Santa Carla, I never could stomach. All the damn vampires." The screen cuts to black. Credits roll. It's brilliant. It's shocking. It's hilarious. But the studio hated it. Executives argued it undercut the emotional weight of the finale. They wanted something louder, something more explosive, a big Hollywood ending. Joel Schumacher fought back. For him, that quiet line was the ending. It wasn't just a punchline. It was the exhale after the storm, the final wink that told the audience, this world has always been this strange. You're only just noticing now. He won the fight, and the line stayed. Today, it's one of the most quoted moments in the film. Printed on posters, whispered at Halloween parties, and remembered decades later as the perfect way to end a story about vampires hiding in plain sight.
Number 14.
When The Lost Boys premiered in 1987, it was a modest box office success, but something else attached to it went far beyond modest: the soundtrack. From the very first note, the music captured the movie's soul, dark, yearning, drenched in 80s synth and gothic rock. The songs created an atmosphere that lingered long after the credits rolled. The standout was "Cry Little Sister" by Gerard McMahon, which became more than just a theme song. It was an anthem, spiritual, haunting, dripping with longing. It set the tone for everything the movie represented. The soundtrack sold millions. In fact, it outsold the movie itself. While the VHS tapes faded and posters peeled with time, the songs never left. They lived on in clubs, Halloween playlists, reissues on vinyl, and fan remixes around the world. Even today, DJs still spin tracks from the Lost Boys soundtrack. Bands cover them. Horror fans know every lyric by heart. Some films are remembered for their visuals, some for their stories. The Lost Boys is remembered for all of that, but also for a sound that echoed from 1987 straight into eternity.
Number 15.
The vampires in The Lost Boys are unforgettable. Pale faces, sharp fangs, glowing eyes that seem to pierce straight through you. But behind that terrifying look was something a lot less glamorous: pain. In the 1980s, special effects makeup wasn't about comfort. The glowing vampire eyes weren't achieved with modern soft lenses. They were made of hard glass, hand-painted to give that unnatural glow. They looked incredible on film, but wearing them was brutal. Actors could only keep them in for minutes at a time before their eyes dried out. They couldn't blink, they couldn't focus. If fake blood splashed onto the lenses, it stuck like glue. If a speck of dust slipped underneath, it felt like a razor blade. Kiefer Sutherland once said filming his close-ups was torture. They'd shoot in tiny bursts, then immediately rip the lenses out before his eyes dried shut. So when you rewatch the movie and see those vampires glaring into the camera with animal intensity, remember this: the look of rage, of hunger, of fury. It wasn't just acting. It was also the very real struggle of trying not to scream through the pain.
Number 16.
The vampire showdown in The Lost Boys is unforgettable. Geysers of blood exploding across walls, ceilings dripping red, the chaos of an all-out supernatural war. But behind the scenes, those gallons of blood weren't just fake gore. The effects team wanted something unique, something audiences hadn't seen before. Typical horror films used watered-down corn syrup with food coloring. It looked sticky, sure, but it didn't behave like real blood under strong lights. So the team got experimental. They thickened it with gelatin, gave it a darker, almost black sheen under certain filters, and added chemicals to keep it flowing for long takes without clotting. The result was a substance that behaved more like oil than syrup, glossy, slick, and unnervingly real. But that realism came at a cost. The chemical smell was nauseating. The mixture stained skin, hair, and costumes permanently. Actors complained about feeling sticky for days after filming. Some had rashes that lingered for weeks. What audiences saw as thrilling gore was, for the people on set, hours of discomfort, cleanup, and suffering. Yet it worked. The movie's blood didn't just look like blood. It looked dangerous, alive, almost sentient. It wasn't just blood. It was another character in the story.
Number 17.
Here's a twist few fans know. In an early draft, the vampire gang wasn't all male. The original concept included at least one female vampire, a seductress meant to mirror David's quiet dominance with her own brand of dangerous allure. She would have provided a counterpoint to Star, who was written as more of a tragic victim than a predator. But as production evolved, the female vampire was cut. The studio worried the group dynamic would feel uneven, or that audiences would expect a romantic subplot that distracted from Michael and Star's story. The decision left us with the all-male gang we know today. But it also changed the tone of the movie. Instead of sexual tension coming from both sides, it became centralized in David and Michael's strange push-pull relationship. Was it rivalry, seduction, or both? The absence of a female predator made the group's energy sharper, more aggressive, and undeniably homoerotic in undertone, something film scholars still debate to this day. So in a strange way, by removing one character, the filmmakers created the ambiguous, layered dynamic that turned The Lost Boys into more than just another vampire flick.
Number 18.
Few scenes in The Lost Boys get under the skin quite like this one. Michael sits down with David and the gang for Chinese food. He looks into his takeout box, and suddenly, the rice in his hands turns into crawling maggots. Then, the noodles in his carton writhe into worms. It's disgusting. It's unforgettable. And yes, it was real. There was no CGI in 1987. What you saw on screen were actual cartons filled with living, crawling creatures. The actors were forced to hold them, stare at them, and react in real time. The trick was in the editing. They filmed clean shots of rice and noodles, then swapped the boxes out mid-scene with the real maggots and worms. When cut together, it created the illusion of food transforming into horror right before Michael's eyes. The reactions you see, the disgust, the gagging, weren't just acting, they were real. Especially for Jason Patrick, who had a genuine aversion to insects. And that's why the scene still works decades later. There's no faking the primal shiver that comes from seeing someone hold a box of live wriggling worms in their bare hands.
Number 19.
The ending of The Lost Boys is iconic as it stands, but originally, it wasn't supposed to stop with Grandpa's one-liner. In the deleted ending, after Grandpa's fridge moment, the camera would have panned back to the ruined vampire lair. Inside, among the rubble, you'd see David's body, and then his eyes would snap open. The implication? David wasn't dead. He was the true lost boy, immortal and waiting, ready to return. The studio debated keeping it. On one hand, it set up a perfect sequel. On the other, it risked undercutting the neat resolution Schumacher had crafted. In the end, they scrapped it, leaving fans to speculate for decades about David's true fate. That deleted ending has become the stuff of legend, whispered in fan forums, reimagined in comic continuations, and debated endlessly. If David survived, what would that have meant for Michael, Star, and Santa Carla? Sometimes the stories we don't see are the ones that haunt us the most.
Number 20.
The original poster for The Lost Boys is as iconic as the movie itself. A blood-red background, David front and center, the gang lined up behind him, and Michael looking brooding with Star at his side. But here's the thing, the poster is a lie. First, David wasn't supposed to be the star. As we covered earlier, he wasn't even written as the lead villain. But marketing knew instantly that Kiefer Sutherland's face would sell tickets. So he was pushed front and center, eclipsing the supposed main character Michael. Second, the tagline, sleep all day, party all night, never grow old, never die. It's fun to be a vampire. Wasn't just misleading. It reframed the entire film. Suddenly, vampires weren't just terrifying, they were cool. That poster helped cement The Lost Boys not as horror, but as pop culture. Teenagers didn't just watch it for scares. They watched it because the vampires looked like the kids they wanted to be. Stylish, untouchable, eternal. Marketing spun the film into a phenomenon, selling an image that was only half the story, and in doing so, made it larger than life.
Bonus.
The name The Lost Boys didn't come out of nowhere. It was borrowed from literature, specifically J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. In Barrie's story, the Lost Boys are children who never grow up, frozen in eternal youth under Peter's leadership. They live in a magical world, disconnected from time, never facing adulthood. Sound familiar? Joel Schumacher and the writers leaned into that parallel. The vampires of Santa Carla were, in a twisted way, Peter Pan's Lost Boys reimagined. They never aged. They lived in caves instead of tree houses. They followed a leader not out of joy, but out of fear. It reframed vampirism not as damnation, but as the ultimate perversion of childhood fantasy. Eternal youth wasn't freedom. It was a prison. By stealing a title from a whimsical children's tale, the film drew a haunting line between the innocence of Neverland and the corruption of Santa Carla, two sides of the same coin, forever linked by the promise of never growing old. And that's the truth about The Lost Boys. Not just a vampire film, not just an 80s relic, but a story that started as a kid's adventure, evolved into a gothic nightmare, and cemented itself as one of the most influential cult films ever made. Behind every foggy shot, every glowing eye, and every blast of saxophone, there were real struggles, strange coincidences, and choices that changed pop culture forever. Because in Santa Carla, nothing was ever what it seemed. The fun was real, the danger was real, and the legend of the Lost Boys is eternal. The Lost Boys wasn't just a movie. It was a warning, a legend, and a cult phenomenon that still bites decades later. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you never miss the next dive into movie history.